This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 487, entitled Masculists Beating Feminists at Their Own Game. Description. This flyer claims that as the number of masculists increases, and given male superior intelligence and higher testosterone levels, masculists will come to dominate gender politics in the coming few years, beating the feminists at their own gender political game. Masculists are becoming increasingly angry and hateful at the way women oppress men, and far worse than vice versa. So soon the masculist explosion will erupt, and the planet will see the masculists take over the gender political stage, dominating it the way men dominate everything with their superior intelligence and genius. Now the flyer itself. Masculists Beating Feminists at Their Own Game, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. As the number of well-informed masculists grows, it's inevitable that there will be numerous verbally violent confrontations between monoconscious feminists who suffer cognitive dissonance at the hands of angry, hateful, bi-conscious masculists, who will bite these women's fucking heads off, utterly rejecting the feminist claims that gender oppression is a one-way street. It's going to be a very painful process that these monoconscious feminists are going to go through, as they are more than challenged by masculists who are smarter than them and a ton more verbally aggressive, given men's 10 times higher testosterone levels in their blood. These monoconscious feminists will not only be answered back by these angry, hateful, bi-conscious masculists, they will be crushed. They will be beaten by the masculists at their own game, as the title states. Just what is that game that is being referred to here? The feminist game is about women's lib. Go back 2 centuries and look at women's position in society. They were chattels of men. They could not own property, did not have the right to divorce their husbands, were not given educations comparable to their brothers, did not have the right to vote, etc. Women were treated as second-class citizens, seen as, in brackets, to be blunt, fuckholes, baby factories, and child raisers. Over the course of the 19th century, more and more women got really pissed off with this situation and began to fight against it. In the mid-19th century, the first American feminist meeting was held. In the UK, feminists realised that their half-century-long sweetness and reason approach to giving women equal rights had failed, so they radicalised and became terrorists by becoming suffragettes and finally got the female vote in the early 20th century. In the 1960s, after the most significant social revolution in history, that is, the male invention of the contraceptive pill, in brackets, which allowed women to reliably choose the number of kids they wanted, and they wanted only 0, 1 or 2 in most cases, close brackets, women had time on their hands, so streamed into the workforce, where they confronted traditionally minded obstructions from men who were not happy at having to work alongside women. The second wave feminist movement was thus born, that pushed for fundamental changes in society, both social and legal, nearly all of which were achieved in the 1970s and 80s. For example, equal pay for equal work, equal access to the professions, the right to have an abortion, in brackets, that the masculists call the MARA, equals maternity rejection right, close brackets, the right to a fault-free divorce, the establishment of gender equality groups in government, to push the feminist agenda in the laws, the schools, etc. Over the decades, feminist ideas spread through society to the point that even working class, not very bright women had absorbed feminist ideals and demanded equal rights with men, and punished the men in their lives if these men did not agree with these feminist ideals. Unfortunately for the feminists, they went overboard, particularly in their takeover of the divorce courts, making them so toxic for men that they indirectly generated a massive male backlash that will destroy them. The second wave feminists were still women who had traditional expectations of men. That is, they saw men as, in quotes,
existing on this earth to pay for women to have babies.
End quote. They did not question this traditional male role. So once they got their fault-free divorce legislation and were able to easily divorce from husbands they no longer wanted to live with, the problem then arose. Quotes, who pays for the kids after a divorce? Of course, these second-wave feminists answered, of course.
Men will pay for the kids and the ex-wife.
Once these second-wave feminists took over the divorce courts, we began to see millions, literally, of divorcing fathers, one father in 4, lose custody of his kids after a divorce. He would lose his house to his ex-wife so that she could raise her kids in it. He would be forced to pay for his kids, whom he would barely see. He would lose half his wealth and half his stuff to his ex-wife, and if she was economically useless, he would often be forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life, with no moral nor legal obligation on her part to get off her fat parasitic ass and become career competent, so that she continued to parasite off his money after the divorce the way she did before the divorce. The above litany of major injustices committed by divorcing wives against their ex-husbands screams out for reform, which is where the Masculists come in. The Masculists are men's libbers. They are men who aim to liberate men from the very negative features of the world created by the feminists, especially in the divorce courts, because the current feminist-controlled divorce court system is so bad for men, such a shitty deal for men, that these politically myopic second-wave feminists have become indirect genociders, who have caused 2/3 of young men in many countries to wipe their hands of marriage and paternity, since they utterly refuse to accept a 1 chance in 4 of being financially crucified in a feminist-controlled divorce court system if they marry and have kids. The Masculists see the solution to this problem as what they call the fipping of women. That is, the creation of a FIP society, in which all adults are FIPs, in brackets, FIP, that's F-I-P, equals financially independent person, in brackets. That is, someone who has bothered to get a career competent education that the economy values and pays well for, so that the FIP woman is capable of pulling her own financial weight as an adult and does not expect to be able to parasite for decades of her life off the labour and money of a man, thus man-slaving him for decades, a major gender crime in the eyes of the Masculists. Masculists see feminists, that is monoconscious feminists, that is feminists who have only had their feminist consciousness raised, in brackets, that is they have been taught how men oppress women, but of nothing in the opposite direction, close brackets, as inherently gender politically biased, believing that gender oppression is a one-way street. Whereas to Masculists, that is bi-conscious Masculists, in brackets, who have absorbed both feminist and Masculist ideas, close brackets, gender oppression is obviously a two-way street. Masculists point out that one only has to look at the financial crucifixion of divorcing fathers in the feminist-controlled divorce courts to see that gender oppression is definitely a two-way street that screams out for reform. So we now live in a historical era of a burgeoning masculist movement in which men are now doing what women were doing in the late 60s, that is, raising their gender political consciousness, educating themselves on how men oppress women and got angry about it. In today's world, men are raising their gender political consciousness and educating themselves how women oppress men and getting angry and hateful about it. Now that men are getting heavily into gender politics, it's inevitable that men will dominate it the way that men dominate everything. The third wave feminist goal of ridding the world of the patriarchy, that is, a political system in which men dominate, where men have the majority of the positions of real power and influence, is seen by masculist scientists as insane, that is, unable to reason scientifically due to an ignorance of science. Masculist scientists are the most formidable ideological enemy of the insane, innumerate, monoconscious feminists, especially of the misandrous, male-dumping, feminazi bitch type of feminists who masculists despise and are out to destroy. Masculist scientists point out that the patriarchy is inevitable because it is genetically determined, due, ironically, in brackets, from the feminist viewpoint, as a side effect of women's hypergamy, that is, the female instinct to mate up with a superior man, to obtain his superior DNA for her kids, so that her kids have superior DNA to hers, which is obviously good for the species, so evolved, and was selected for in evolutionary terms, and that all women have it. Women have always had a monopoly over reproduction. It is the woman who chooses which man gets to ejaculate in her to make her pregnant. So women have been sexually selecting for thousands of generations the characteristics in men that are to women's advantage. Thus men have the characteristics that women want them to have. If some man has qualities that women don't like, then that man does not reproduce, and his combination of genes gets wiped out. Women chose men who were taller, bigger, stronger, fiercer, and smarter than women. The first four characteristics were chosen by women since such men would be more able to protect their woman from other men who were tall, big, strong, fierce. Women chose men who were smarter than them because smarter men made better hunters. Women were totally dependent on men to get any meat protein, since women could not hunt, being tied down to the home to look after helpless infants. By sexually selecting smarter men, that is, smarter hunters, women were better able to obtain more meat protein, which increased their and their babies' chances of not starving to death. Thus men are smarter than women, thanks to women's sexual selection of smarter men. Men are also much more aggressive than women, with 10 times the level of testosterone in their blood. Violent, tall, strong, fierce males were better able to conquer enemy tribes, take over their land and meat supply, so that their own tribe's women could eat better and survive better. Modern research shows that men are 4 IQ points smarter than women on average, due, in brackets, probably, to the fact that men have only 1 X chromosome in their cells, whereas women have 2. Men thus express a greater variety of genes over a whole population than women, so are more variable, a phenomenon called GMV, that's greater male variance. So when it comes to IQ, men have a 10% higher IQ variance than women. Knowing the average IQs and the IQ variances of the two sexes, one obtains the mathematical formulae for the male and the female Bell IQ distribution curves. With these two curves, one can then calculate the proportion of men to women at various IQ levels. This is the end of part 1.